Some houses are just old, others are waiting. Sam Mitchell was never afraid of an empty building, but when the silence started watching him, he realized there are some places you should never enter alone. In 2005, Sam Mitchell, a 29-year-old photographer, found himself standing in front of an old house at the edge of town. He had always loved capturing forgotten places. The more abandoned and eerie, the better. His strength was his creativity and his fearlessness when exploring dangerous, decaying buildings. But it was also his weakness. Sam never knew when to stop, never thought anything could really harm him, until now. The house in question had been left untouched for years, a decaying shell of what it once was. It stood alone, isolated by overgrown grass and thick trees. The locals whispered about it, how strange things happened to anyone who stayed there. People who went inside often felt like they were being watched. Some claimed to hear whispers, while others saw things move in the dark. But to Sam, it was just another shoot, another chance to capture the beauty of decay. He had explored hundreds of places like this one. Nothing scared him anymore. Or so he thought. Sam's journey to the house wasn't just for the sake of photography. After his parents passed away the year before, he found himself aimless, struggling with grief and isolation. The camera became his escape, and these haunted places allowed him to feel a strange connection with the past, a past that could never hurt him. He arrived in the late afternoon, the sun beginning to dip behind the trees. The house was more broken than he imagined. Boards hung loose from the windows, the roof sagged, and the door stood slightly ajar. It was like the house was inviting him in. Ignoring the chill that ran down his spine, Sam stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath his feet, dust swirling in the stale air. He pulled out his camera, snapping photos of the crumbling walls, the peeling wallpaper, the forgotten furniture. Each room told a story of a family that had once lived there, a family that was long gone. But the deeper Sam ventured into the house, the more he felt off. It wasn't just the stillness or the decay. It was the feeling of being watched. He brushed it off as nerves. After all, he was alone in a big, creepy house. Of course he would feel uneasy, but as he reached the staircase leading to the second floor, something caught his eye. In the far corner of the living room, barely visible in the shadows, stood a large, cracked mirror. Sam hadn't noticed it before. It was covered in dust, and the glass had darkened with age. But what stood out most was the figure he saw standing in it, his own reflection, except something was wrong. His reflection wasn't facing him. It stood with its back turned, staring into the darkness beyond. Sam blinked, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. But when he looked again, the reflection hadn't changed. His heart began to race, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. He stepped closer, hand trembling as he reached for the mirror, desperate to make sense of what he was seeing. As his fingers touched the cold glass, the reflection slowly turned around, its face twisted in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. But it wasn't his face. It was someone else. Someone trapped. Sam stumbled back, the camera falling from his hands. The reflection vanished, leaving only his own panicked face staring back at him. He told himself it was just his imagination. He had been working too hard, pushing himself too far. But as he stood there trying to regain control, he heard it, the softest of whispers. "Leave, before it's too late." Sam's blood ran cold. The voice didn't belong to him. He looked around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He had to get out. He turned to leave, but before he could take a step, the door slammed shut on its own, the echo ringing through the house. Panicked, Sam rushed to the door, pulling with all his strength, but it wouldn't budge. The house had trapped him, and then the footsteps started, slow, deliberate, coming from upstairs. Sam's strength had always been his ability to face danger head-on, but now for the first time he felt real fear. He had come to the house to escape his grief, to find some sense of control. But now the house controlled him. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just at the top of the stairs. Sam's breath caught in his throat as he looked up. Standing there, at the top of the staircase, was a figure, a dark shadow with hollow eyes, staring directly at him. "Why are you here?" the figure whispered. Its voice was soft but filled with malice, as if it had waited for him for years. Sam didn't have an answer. He didn't know why he was there anymore. All he knew was that he needed to leave, but the house wasn't going to let him go. The shadow began to descend the stairs, slow but steady, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. In a moment of desperation, Sam grabbed his camera, snapping a photo of the figure as it moved closer. The flash lit up the room for a brief second, but when the light faded, the figure was gone. The room was empty once again, but the door remained locked, and the whispers continued. The hours stretched on, and Sam lost all sense of time. He tried every window, every door, but nothing opened. The house had claimed him, just as it had claimed the others before. In the end, Sam sat in the center of the living room, his camera clutched tightly in his hands. The whispers circled around him, growing louder with each passing "Stay with us." And then everything went silent. The air grew still, the house waiting. Suddenly the front door creaked open on its own. Away. Sam stood up, his legs weak and shaky, and walked toward the door. But as he stepped outside, he realized the sun had long set. The world outside was dark, and the path back to town seemed to stretch on forever. Behind him, the house stood quiet once more. But in the reflection of the broken window, if you looked closely enough, you could still see him, standing in the doorway, trapped